Recently, I put out a video about Dify. In that video, I suggested using SearXNG or searching for web searches. One of my viewers said they couldn't connect to SearXNG or searching from Dify, and asked if I had any suggestion for getting them connected. I don't know why host.docker.local wasn't working, but let's take a look at how you can get around this, which means we have to peek a little bit into how networking works in Docker. Now, this is not a full networking tutorial in Docker because it gets kind of complicated. I just want to take the highest level look to solve this exact problem. Now, a few folks have asked for videos about Docker here as well, since it gets used a lot with some of the various AI front ends. So we might see some more Docker content as well in the near future. By the way, the Greek letter that looks like an X is pronounced chi and typically spelled like CHI. So replace X with CHI in SearXNG and it's searching. So do I pronounce the product as SearXNG because it's chi? I don't know. But thanks to Dixon1E for pointing that out. It makes both more and less sense to me now. For anyone new to Docker, everything about Docker can be super confusing. You can start a container that's running Nginx or some other web server, but you can't access the web server. That new container, let's give it a name of web, has been given an IP address, and it probably is using port 80. But I can't go to that address in the web browser and hit the server. But a service running in that container can use your network and get to the outside world. So the easiest way to get access to that container is to expose a port. On the Docker command line on the host, we could add -p, and then we want to use the localhost port 8181, for instance, to connect to the container's port. Now, if we open a browser to localhost port 8181, we see the Nginx default page. But what happens when we start an Ubuntu container and run a bash shell? Can we see the Nginx host? I'll run docker run --name Ubuntu -it Ubuntu bash, and I'm dropped into a prompt. That command is basically saying run a new container, give it a name of Ubuntu, run it interactively, use the image on Docker Hub called Ubuntu, and when you start it up, run bash. And then try ping. And since our container name is web, enter web. It says there is no ping. Ubuntu has nothing installed, but at least we can install stuff, which you can't do with things like BusyBox. So apt update, and then apt install iputils ping and curl and jq, since we're going to use those in a little bit. Now ping web, but still nothing's there. So when Docker creates containers, it adds them to a new virtual network. That's a bridge network, which does a lot of magic stuff. It gives the containers a new IP address and gives them access to the outside world, but the outside world and you don't have access to the container. But all the containers on the same network have access to each other. Now wait, if they all have access to each other, why couldn't I ping web from my Ubuntu container? Well, one thing you don't get with a default bridge is the ability to access containers by name. So we can ping if we can figure out the IP address of the Nginx container. But how do we do that? The docker inspect command is the key to understanding everything there is to know about Docker. So docker inspect web from your host terminal gets us a JSON doc that shows a lot of info. Towards the bottom is networks, and bridge is the one network there. And there we can see IP address. So grab that and back in the Ubuntu terminal, run ping and that IP address. It'll come back with a response. But it turns out it's really easy to add your own network, and then you get the ability to access a container by its name for free. And sometimes you want to put containers on different networks so they don't have access to what they shouldn't. The best way to do this is to add the network to the Docker file or the Docker Compose file you're using for your app. But let's work with what we have. The first thing I want to do is create a new network. I'll call it mynet. From my host terminal, not the Ubuntu container, I can run the command docker network create mynet. If you don't specify a driver to use, which we didn't, then it will create a local bridge network. just like the default bridge. But MyNet gets a bonus feature. Let's add web to it and my Ubuntu container. Docker network connect MyNet web, and then Docker network connect MyNet Ubuntu. Now, in the Ubuntu container, ping web again, and magically, it works. Okay, so in my environment, I have SearXNG searching already running. But if from Ubuntu I try to run ping searching, it fails. So it's running, but it's on a different network. We could just add searching to the same network. There isn't an explicit number to the number of networks you can add to a container, but each takes resources, so don't go crazy. So Docker network connect MyNet searching will add searching to MyNet. Now from the Ubuntu container, you can run curl http://searching port 8080 /search format equals JSON &q equals test. But that doesn't work. In Bash with curl, you need to wrap the URL in quotes. So do that, but that's super ugly. So run the curl command again and pipe it to JQ. That'll do the search and pretty print it. In order for this to work, you first have to enable JSON output in searching. I'll let you figure out how to get that going. So now we have it working from our Ubuntu container, and now we need to get it to work for Dify. So Docker network connect MyNet Docker sandbox -1. And now in the Dify UI, you can just add http://searching 8080, and it should just work. You might find that you need to add another container to that network, but you know how to do that now. There's a lot more you can do with Docker and networking. I think there is like 8 different types of networks available. There are some great tutorials out there, and I really like this one from Network Chuck on this exact topic. And it goes into far more detail. It's pretty cool what you can do. And if you get into Docker, there's an awesome podcast called Devops and Docker Talk run by a friend of mine, Brett Fisher. In fact, I used to be the co-host of the show, up until we pivoted from making a tool for SSH keys to building what we all now know as Ollama. Hopefully this has given you some insight into how Docker and networking works, and maybe it's a touch less confusing. If you have any questions, you can ask in my Discord or the Ollama Discord, both of which are listed below, or just in the comments to this video. Who knows, maybe your question will inspire me to create another video that solves your question. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye. Water's here this time.